Hopefully this works. Awesome. There we go. All right. Cool. Sorry, YouTube. Took me a second. It didn't load the first time to let me go live, but I think we're good now. I think we're good on Instagram. Today we're going to be looking through the book of John, chapter 13. This is a pretty interesting passage topic we're going to be talking about today. So we'll have to digest these in different sections, kind of like we normally do, but a little bit different today just because there's more points being made. So where we are in the time frame of Jesus, we are actually really close to Lord's, or the Last Supper as we call it. The Last Supper happens, or where the disciples are together with Jesus and they're having this supper, but it doesn't quite dive into it as much as some of the other books do. So we'll talk about that here in a second. And then we're going to actually point out a couple of different things. We're going to see Jesus, what it says. So there's the three things that we're going to be talking about today. There's also this new commandment that kind of Jesus gives. And so there's, like I said, a bunch of different sections we're going to be talking about, but let's go ahead and dive in and get started so we can get through it all in this time frame. So like I said, John chapter 13, if you want to go ahead and turn there in your Bibles or on your phones, whatever it is for you. John chapter 13. All right, let's go ahead and get reading. We're only going to read 1 through 11 to start, and then we'll move on from there. Before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Now it was time for the supper. The devil had already put himself into the heart of Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray him. Jesus knew the Father had given everything into his hand, and that he had come from the Father, come from God, and that he was going back to God. So he got up from the supper, laid aside his outer clothing, took a towel, and tied it around himself. Next, he poured out water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and dry them with a towel tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who asked him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you do not realize now, but afterwards you will understand." "You will never wash my feet," Peter said. Jesus replied, "If I do not wash you, you have no part with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." "One who has bathed," Jesus told him, "does not need to wash anything except his feet, but he is completely clean. You are clean, but not all of you." For he knew who would betray him. This is why Jesus said, "No, not all of you are clean." All right, so something that's kind of interesting here in this passage, real quick. So the author here in this passage, John, kind of is writing about this time frame where they are together Jesus is together with the disciples, and they're kind of having this Last Supper time frame. Now the idea is that Jesus washing the feet of the disciple happens kind of right before that supper happens, maybe kind of while the food is being passed around or being prepared, whatever it may be. So kind of as if they've come together, they're hanging out right before dinner, and Jesus is going to wash the feet of the disciples. This has a few different implications and reasonings of why Jesus does this, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But we see that this is kind of a time frame where Jesus is trying to show something to the disciples. Now, we see here that Jesus is getting prepared to wash the feet of the disciples, and he starts to wash the feet of his disciples. So all 12 of them, he's going to go one by one and wash their feet. Okay. Now, when he comes to Peter, we see Peter be like Jesus, don't do this. Like you don't have to wash my feet. In this time frame, to wash the feet of somebody was actually something kind of like the lower class did to the upper class, or in some areas where in this time frame, like the wife would do to the husband, or the children to the parents, or the servants to the leaders, whatever it may be. It was more of a like, I am not like, you are holier than thou type of a thing, so I'm going to wash your feet. And so for Jesus, who at this time frame the disciples saw as their leader, for him to do that to them was a very like odd thing. But also Jesus is showing them some stuff here, important things that we need to know. And so for Peter to be like, no, like, don't wash my feet, like, I don't deserve this, makes sense. So it makes sense for Peter to say this to Jesus at first. But Jesus points out some things, okay? A couple things that we need to see here, which we're going to continue to read once we get to verse 12. But the first thing that we want to point out and that we want to see is that there in verse 8, Jesus replies to Peter when Peter says, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus replies with, "If I do not wash you, you have no part with me." Now, we can equate this, or we can look at this as the same way as whenever we accept Christ, whenever we are baptized and things like that, we are washed clean, right, through this kind of purification of our soul, purification of our sin, that kind of stuff, from accepting Jesus and being baptized. Same kind of concept here. Jesus is saying, if you are not cleaned through me, if I do not clean you, you have no part with me. Same kind of concept here. So Jesus is saying this to Peter, saying like, this is something I'm doing because it's going through me, more than it is just you being cleansed in some other way. But we also see that Jesus, or Peter, kind of points out, but not only my feet are dirty, my hands and my head, like, I am a dirty human. I am like in actual dirt, like dirty, right? But Jesus says, in a sense, like, it is not the rest of you that needs to be cleaned, it's your feet. Why does he say just his feet needs to be cleaned? Well, a few different reasons, and we can kind of think and we can point out that maybe it's because at this time, the feet were the dirtiest thing on the body, and so it's the thing that needed cleaning the most. Because at that time, the roads were only dirt or rocks and things like that, so your feet got super dirty. They only wore sandals, which is why I love wearing Chacos. Just kidding, that's not the only reason. I want to be more like Jesus. No, I'm totally joking. But it's because like the feet were super dirty, so Jesus is like cleansing the feet, and he's saying like, man, this is the dirtiest part of you. If I can clean the dirtiest parts of you, I can clean all of you with no problem, right? So same kind of concepts there. Jesus washes the feet of the disciples, shows them some different things. Now the second thing that Jesus wants to show them, we're going to read right here in verses 12 through 20. So we're going to read verses 12 through 20. This is mainly Jesus talking right here. And there's one other thing he really wants to show them. So let's read through that real quick, and we'll talk about that. When Jesus had washed their feet and put out his outer clothing, he reclined against and said to them, "Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are speaking rightly, since that is what I am. So if I am your Lord and your teacher, have washed your feet, if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done for you. Truly I tell you, a servant is no greater than his master, a messenger no greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. I am not speaking about all of you. I know those I have chosen, but the scripture must be fulfilled. The one who eats my bread has risen his heel against me, and I am telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am he. Truly I tell you, whoever receives anyone I send receives me, and the one who receives me receives him who sent me." All right, so this is now after the washing of the feet of the disciples. Jesus has now washed all 12 of their feet. He now sits back and he kind of tells them the reasons why I did this. And he kind of gives them a reason of why he washed their feet. Okay, so The main reason that Jesus wants to point out here, and the reasons why he's washing the feet, he wants to show them true servanthood. He wants to show them what it looks like to be a servant, right? That it doesn't matter if you are the master, like it doesn't matter if you are the messenger. It doesn't matter if you are the one who sent the messenger, right? There in verse 16, truly I tell you, a servant is no greater than his master, and a messenger is no greater than the one who sent him, right? He's saying that if you are a true follower of me, regardless of status, you are called to serve. And that's what Jesus does here. He is technically, right? He is greater than his disciples. He is greater than these 12 guys around him, but he humbles himself, right, to the extent of servanthood. He serves them by washing his feet. That's what he's trying to point out, that, hey, none of you are greater than anyone else. You should be serving others. And if you get that, then you're doing it right. But we also see there at the ending, Jesus points out, right, that kind of this nod at someone's going to betray me. And he who eats my bread has risen his heel against me. He who will endure, or he who will be a part of this Last Supper, one of you will betray me. But he says it in a way of like, the scripture has to be fulfilled. This idea that I have to die needs to be fulfilled. But I really like the last part of this little section, verse 20. Truly I tell you, whoever receives anyone I send receives me, and the one who receives me also receives him who sent me. So this says anyone who receives a follower of God receives me. So whoever receives Jesus into their lives also receives the Father, God, who sent Jesus. And I think that's pretty cool. So now we're going to get into this next little section here, right? Of in my Bible, it is titled Judas's betrayal, or prediction of the betrayal, excuse me. So Jesus is going to predict that somebody in the room who's a part of this Last Supper is going to betray Jesus, right? And we see in other scriptures or other passages where this story is laid out, but this one's laid out just a little bit different. The reason why it is thought that this story is maybe laid out just a little bit different, and it doesn't go through the different sacraments and the different parts that are a part of the Lord's Supper. So in other passages we see where it talks about the bread and it's passed out, and it talks about the wine or the blood poured out of Jesus, and it is then dispersed and everyone drinks of it. That doesn't happen here in this passage. It is thought because the author of this passage is writing to people who already know these things, and that's the thought of why it's not actually written out in here. So instead of going straight to talking about the Lord's Supper and breaking it down, it just goes into this idea of the betrayal. So we're going to talk about that here, verses 21 through 30. So let's read 21 through 30. And this is the betrayal prediction of Judas. When Jesus had said this, he was troubled in spirit, and he testified, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. Then Jesus' disciples started looking at one another, uncertain which one he was speaking about. One of the disciples, the one Jesus loved, was reclining close beside Jesus. Simon Peter mentioned to him to find out who it was and who he was talking about. So he leaned back against Jesus and asked him, Lord, who is it? Jesus replied, the one I give a piece of bread to after I have dipped. When he had dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas, Simon Iscariot's son. After Judas ate the piece of bread, Satan entered him, so that Jesus told him, "What are you doing? Whatever you are doing, do it quickly." None of those reclining at the table knew why he had said this to him. Since Judas kept the money bag, some thought that Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the festival, or that he should give something to the poor. After receiving the piece of bread, he immediately left, and it was night. Okay, so other points in this, or other passages, especially like in Mark chapter 14, it lists it, or it talks about this idea that Jesus is telling them someone's going to betray me, right? And other scriptures, like in Mark, they go one by one, disciples, and asking him, like, Jesus, am I the one who's going to betray you? A lot like that popular TikTok, is that me, Jesus? If you like that TikTok, that's where it comes from. It comes from this idea that Jesus is telling them someone's going to betray me. And so they go around one by one asking. Now that doesn't quite happen here in this passage. Like the one by one asking if it is me who's going to betray you. But we see that Simon Peter at this point kind of leans over, asks Jesus, like, who is it? And Jesus simply replies with, the one who I give a piece of bread to is the one who's going to betray me. But the disciples at the time frame don't know that it's going to be a betrayal. They just think that it's going to be like, or like they don't know why Jesus gives the bread to Judas immediately, right? We see that they're at the end, they're wondering if he gives them the bread because he needs to like give money to the poor, that he needs to go buy some things for the festival, whatever it may be. They don't know why Jesus gives the bread to Judas, right? They don't know immediately that it's because he's going to betray Jesus. Now, something that's pretty interesting here too, we also see that Judas is the one who keeps the money. He's the one who holds onto the money bag. The accountant of the group, whatever it may be. I think it's pretty interesting, right? That Judas, the one who holds the money, is also going to be the one who receives money for betraying Jesus. It's kind of interesting, right? Maybe it's kind of a little foreshadowing of who is going to betray Jesus. We don't really know that, but that's kind of interesting, right? But we also see that Jesus, after he gives the bread to Judas, and Judas partakes in the bread and eats the bread, right? It says that Satan enters him. So what does that mean? That Satan enters Judas? Well, Satan hardens the heart of Judas and kind of, I guess, gives Judas this idea that he's going to betray Jesus, right? That Satan is the one kind of leading the way on this betrayal because he wants to see Jesus ended, right? He wants to see Jesus not be victorious. But as we know, Satan is not going to be victorious, right? But Jesus replies to Judas saying, whatever you're going to do it quickly, right? And so this whole time frame from Judas kind of taking the bread, Satan entering him, Jesus telling him, whatever you're going to do it quickly. Judas leaves after this. Like, he's not there for the remainder of the night. He leaves, and this is when Judas goes and betrays Jesus. Like, it happens right here. Like, this is the time frame, right? This is all coming forward. The idea is that this kind of this supper, this time frame of them doing this happens on like a Wednesday night, roughly. This is the idea that it happens kind of on a Wednesday, and then by Thursday, Jesus is arrested. By Friday, Jesus is put to the cross. So it happens real quick, right? So we kind of see Jesus predict that a little bit too. Whatever you're going to do it quickly. So it happens pretty quick over just a couple days. So Jesus predicts the betrayal of Judas. Now this next part, verses 31 through 35 is called the new command, or the new commandment type thing. So Jesus is going to give a command to the disciples. So let's read that real quick, and then we'll finish out this passage with Peter's denial prediction. So verse 31, when he left, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him by helping himself, and he will glorify him at once. Children, I am with you a little while longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so now I tell you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new command. Love one another, just as I have loved you, and you are also to love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. So this is a really difficult thing to hear sometimes, because I can tell you, for me, it's hard. But this commandment that Jesus gives the disciples to love one another can be pretty difficult to hear, and be very difficult to actually to do. Right? Have you ever had a time frame where, uh, man, you need to show love to someone, or you need to care for someone, but it's really difficult because you'd rather be selfish, or you'd rather not do that. You'd rather not serve. You'd rather not love, right? But we see here that Jesus says, like, I'm commanding you that you should love everyone the way that I love everyone. And when you show love to everyone and you do love in all areas of your life, people will know you because, or people will know me, people will know Jesus because of the way you love, right? Our lives are supposed to look different from before we accepted Christ to when we accept Christ. It's supposed to be a different person because of the love that we show for everyone else. People are going to know us because of the love we have for others. It's going to be much more than just, oh, I went and helped somebody on this mission trip, or hey, I fill in the blank. I did whatever it may be, some kind of service, or I helped somebody with something, whatever it may be. No, it's called to an everyday, every action, everything you do is supposed to be out of love. That's really difficult. But that's what Jesus calls us to, is when you love everyone, they will know me because of your love. And I think it's pretty awesome. The way that Jesus kind of betrays himself there, that he is love, so we should show love, right? So the ending of this passage, which we'll read here in just a second, is another area where Jesus points out and predicts something that's going to happen, right? We saw that Jesus predicted that Judas is going to betray him. But now we're going to see that Jesus is going to predict that Peter is going to deny him. So verse 36, 38, just these last few verses, says, Lord, Simon Peter said to him, where are you going? Jesus answered, where I am going, you cannot follow. You cannot follow me now, but you will follow later. Lord, Peter asked, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Jesus replied, will you lay down your life for me? Truly I tell you, a rooster will not crow until you have denied me 3 times. So we see Peter, this is kind of like the ending of the Last Supper. Everyone's kind of dispersing, everyone's kind of going their own ways. The supper's over. Jesus is about to leave. And so Peter kind of stops him, like, hey, like, where are you going? And Jesus replied with, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later. Now, these can mean a few different things. It could mean that maybe they're talking about the garden, where Jesus is going to go to the garden and pray heavily that, hey, don't follow me now, but later you'll be there. Maybe. Or this is talking about heaven, right? That Jesus is saying, like, hey, where I'm going right now, aka heaven, you can't come right now, but one day you'll be there. One day you'll be there with me. And so regardless, it is this idea that where Jesus is going, we cannot be right now, but one day we will be with Jesus. And so Peter kind of asks Jesus again, like, why can't I follow you now? Like, why can't I just come with you? Like, I thought we were bros type thing. But then he says, like, do you not understand? Like, I would lay down my life for you, Jesus. Like, let me just come with you. Like, if it's going to be a battle, if it's going to be whatever, like, I'm going to lay down my life for you. But then Jesus responds, very interesting here. He says, will you lay down your life for me? Like, would you really do that? And I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves, right? Would we lay down our lives for Jesus? Would we do that? Does Jesus mean so much to us that we would lay down our lives for him? Are we going to respond like Peter and be like, but I would lay down my life for you because I care so much about our relationship? think it's a question we have to ask ourselves. But then we see right there at the end, Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, a rooster will not crow until you have denied me 3 times." Now, if you know anything about the coming of that, right? Jesus predicts he is going to deny him. We know that Peter denies Jesus 3 times before the rooster crows. And so we see that happens, that comes to fruition, right? The same way that Jesus predicts the deny or the betrayal, he also predicts that Peter is going to deny him. So that's kind of a wrap up of like today's lesson. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at John chapter 14. Tomorrow, like I said, at 11 o'clock, come back. I'll be here again tomorrow going through John chapter 14. I just want to kind of leave you with this, though, today as we kind of wrap up that a few things. We need to remember that we are called to love, that God calls us, or Jesus even calls us here in this passage, to be love so that people can see and be pointed to Jesus. Our actions are what point people to Jesus or point people away from Jesus. So are you going to be love and point people to Jesus? And are you willing to lay down your life for Jesus? Or are you going to be like Peter and deny him? So, guys, I hope that was helpful today. If not, man, let me know, because I want to do better for you guys. You deserve to know more about Jesus and deserve to know well. But guys, I hope this was helpful. Hope you have a wonderful day. We miss you guys. Miss hanging out with you. Can't wait to see you all again. But guys, have a great day. We'll see you next time. Love you guys.